あ、一番向こうの椅子のお席お願いします。大丈夫ですよね、もちろん。全然資料をお持ちでない方いらっしゃいますか？あ、西村さんごめんなさい、席がね。ごめんなさい、申し訳ないです。はい、資料、はい。はい。ああ、階段。はい。
Oh, right. Yeah, got him. I think I met him. I don't know. But it's gonna happen. You know, somebody told me yesterday. I really like college. Yeah, he was very funny. I mean,
はい。
大丈夫。
はい。
はい。Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome today's guest speaker. クローズアップ取る方、真ん中の方進みます。クローズアップ取る方、どうぞ。
oh, okay. Okay. You want me? Oh, okay. I got it. You have, you guys look like a Senate confirmation file.
手を挙げたり、声をかけていただけると。見てほしい方、ちょっと手を挙げたりしてあげてください。
Mr. Ambassador. Thank you.
Okay.
この辺りでよろしいでしょうか。
A lot of familiar faces there.
That's good or bad?
I'll ask them.
ではバックにぜひ。
They told me to do that, to bang the hammer. Well, thank you for coming this morning in such large numbers. I'll just briefly read out the notice and then we'll get straight into the press conference. US Ambassador Ram Emanuel is now about 2 years into his post here in Tokyo. His predecessor, Bill Hegarty, left abruptly in July 2019. He's laughing. Mr. Emanuel arrived in Tokyo with a reputation as a bit of a political street fighter. His popular nickname is Rambo, or my favorite is the Ram Father. Did you know about that one? Alludes to his time as a senior advisor to President Bill Clinton and chief of staff to President Barack Obama, and as Chicago's mayor from 2011 to 2019. He has won praise in the Japanese media since for his smooth and open approach as ambassador and his willingness to leave the embassy compound to get a feel for life in Tokyo. Unlike his predecessors, Caroline Kennedy and John Roos, he also seems happy to dive into potentially contentious political issues. He made headlines last year when he went to the Tokyo Rainbow Pride Parade and indicated support for legal same-sex marriage. And he has become well known for snarky tweets about China. I say snarky because that's what Reuters call them. He wants to share today his perspective on Japan's transformation into a full spectrum power in national security, the economy, and cultural influence. He will discuss Japan's achievements in terms of US-Japan's ties, Indo-Pacific leadership, and global engagement. I'll step out of the way. Just to remind you, if you haven't, can you switch off your keitais, your mobile phones? We don't want to get interrupted. Thank you. Patience.
Now I'm feeling like this is my bar mitzvah rather than the Senate confirmation. Exactly 2 years ago, tomorrow, Amy and I touched down at the airport here in Tokyo. Hand in hand, we stepped off the flight and into our new home where we feel right at home, here in Japan. Before we got on that plane, and during the Senate process of confirmation, I did my homework on Japan. I read everything I get my hands on. I inquired, I asked, I listened, which was new for me. The many experts, or as I used to affectionately call them in the White House, the propeller heads, that I met back in Washington, all read from the same script of conventional wisdom on Japan. They all cautioned me. Japan moves slow, incredibly slow, and urged that I adopt a new quality that was unusual for me, patience. And my wife usually says that if we had a fourth child, she would call it patience, so I would have a daily reminder of that quality. After 2 years as U.S. Ambassador here to Japan, I have a message for all the experts back in Washington. You don't know Japan of today. You're wrong. All the experts, despite their many degrees and years of experience, their predictions and predictions of the future of what Japan would be were myths. Japan has busted every one of those myths in my time here. The experts did know the old Japan. Not the new Japan that is being emerging on the world stage, the post-COVID, the post-coercion, and the post-conflict Japan. They all failed to precede us. The last 2 years, in my view, have been marked by the era and will be known in history as the era of transition and transformation. When Japan hit its stride and set a new metric and a new measure for itself, and what it can and what it will do. Japan has stepped up to its responsibilities to the U.S.-Japan alliance, to the region, and to the global system in support of a rules-based order. In fact, the onus now on the United States, on us, is to make changes at the same pace that Japan has made changes. We have to ask ourselves if our own actions will be bold enough and fast enough to meet the changes taking place throughout the region. In short, if we're honest with ourselves, whether we are keeping pace with Japan and the requirements that are now strategic challenges here in the region. To illustrate the point of transition and transformation this morning, I'm going to debunk 4 myths that the policy experts have on Japan. Myth 1. Due to politics, economics, and public opinion and history, Japan will not play its role in defense policy and deterrence. Japan's transition and transformation on defense, I believe, best exemplifies its most profound change, but not limited to that. Driven by a proliferation of existential threats, Japan has moved forward on defense at a quickened pace. No one predicted that Japan would so fundamentally update its 3 national security documents. In doing so, they joined the United States, Australia, Korea, and many other partners with an aligned vision of how to promote peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific and meet the challenges head-on. In fact, later on today, I will be at the Ministry of Defense for a major announcement on the first down payment on that defense and strategic deterrence. To put some meat on the bones of these new documents, Japan committed to doubling the defense budget within the next 5 years to reach 2% of GDP by 2027. NATO, by way of reference, NATO countries made that 2% commitment almost 20 years ago. Thank you for the laugh. Only 11 of the 31 NATO allies are actually expected to meet that 2% this year, despite war returning to Europe for the first time since, or the second time since World War II. Japan will do it in just 5 years. In fact, Japan, at the end of those 5 years, will have the 3rd largest defense budget in the world after the United States and China. Japan also made 3 historic decisions on its defense capabilities. First, Japan will acquire a counterstrike capability of 400 Tomahawks starting in 2025, which will be the part of today's announcement by the defense minister and myself. A year ahead of schedule. They front-loaded the funding rather than space it out over the series of years to demonstrate their commitment to its procurement and to their deterrence. Second, for the first time in the post-war era, Japan provided military equipment to a nation in conflict by delivering non-lethal military assistance to Ukraine, a world away. Third, Japan eased the 3 principles on defense equipment transfer and will sell back an inherently defensive Patriot missiles to the United States for our own inventory for here in Japan and in the region. No one on K Street or at the universities or the think tanks that I consulted ever managed, or imagined rather, this would be possible. Not one of them, let alone all 3 of them, not the 2%, not what's come with it, the 2%, or the national security documents. In fact, if we're honest here, and they're honest with themselves, all of them have predicted the opposite. A final component of improved defense and deterrence has been the multilateralization of military exercises here. Japan has been a catalyst for building a broader network of defense partners. A few years ago, overwhelmingly, the U.S.-Japan bilateral and U.S. regional exercises included the U.S. and one other nation, or maybe 2 at the most. Now, almost all of these same exercises have at least doubled the number of countries participating and almost doubled the number of servicemen and women in those exercises. Yama Sakura was a bilateral US-Japan exercise with 5,200 servicemen and women. Today, it includes almost 10,000 troops from 4 different countries. Annul X was a bilateral US-Japan exercise with 14,000 personnel. Now, 20,000 personnel from 4 different countries participate. Iron Fist was a bilateral US-Japan amphibious exercise that grew to 6 countries in 2023 and will expand to 9 total nations this year. As aggressors grow more belligerent, Japan is at the forefront of countries rallying to protect the peace and prosperity by raising the costs of aggression and ensuring a multinational force presents a singular force of deterrence in this region. This is a dramatically different approach to deterrence and welcomed by the United States. And Japan with us has been an initiator of this expansion and different character and quality of our exercises here in the region. Myth 2. Japan never looked beyond its own horizon. The experts said Japan viewed security and development basically as an internal issue, that it had a narrow diplomatic comfort zone through which it pursued its national interests. They were wrong there too. Japan has delivered on diplomacy, whether at the bilat, trilat, quad, or multilateral. Japan has participated as a leader in many of these formats. What changed? Japan realized that it needed to play a bigger role to project the alliance and set out to be a counterweight to regional aggressors. As I have said many times, some of you have heard it, the relationship between the United States and Japan has been one that has moved and evolved from alliance protection to alliance projection. And when you take diplomacy, defense spending in kind, our deterrence has grown equally. More than before, Japan understands that its security and prosperity are closely attached to what happens in the region and around the globe. It's fair to say, perhaps, that where Japan had been deficient diplomatically was failing to leverage all the capital and goodwill that it had built up, especially here in the Indo-Pacific. That is a past note, not examples of what happens today for Japan. The Prime Minister's statement at Shangri-La speaks volumes about Japan's diplomatic ambitions and posture. He said Ukraine today may be East Asia tomorrow. That's been a guiding strategic view. That's not a nation to join along for the ride or just go along for the ride. Japan realized diplomatic leadership comes with international responsibilities. Over the last 7 decades, around the world, Japan has provided over $500 billion in development assistance, building infrastructure, human capacity, and legal systems. Here in the region, Japan has been ASEAN's leading development partner with an estimated $130 billion in development and economic assistance. This investment has led many Southeast Asians and countries to view Japan for what it is, a bedrock of security and stability in the region. From Burma to Brunei, from Manila to Malaysia. Japan, when you look at all the public opinion surveys, is the most trusted partner to be aligned with. And that has invaluable political capital. In polling of the Southeast Asian leaders and countries, almost 55% ranked Japan as the most trusted major power in the region, beating out every other country. And about 2/3 of these leaders expressed confidence in Japan's role in providing regional security and promoting stability. These same public opinion surveys shows China to be the most distrusted partner, and in a recent Pew survey, many nations describe China, quote, as a major threat. Not exactly what I would describe as goodwill capital. Why the difference? It's pretty simple in my view. PRC aid only aids the Chinese Communist Party, while Japan's aid benefits the intended beneficiaries. While China offers Belt and Roads, they only leave debt and dependence. Basic strategy of the Belt and Roads is a one-way street that benefits Beijing and Beijing alone. Aid recipients lose any economic benefit of the project and even the financed asset when it all is said and done. And there are many examples around the globe of that type of debt and dependency. Japan's high standing in the region is a result of years of investments and economic assistance in relationships, partnerships, and development. And what is transformational about these investments is how they are enabling a more activist Japan diplomatically. Now Japan is leveraging its relationships for diplomatic wins, most notably on Ukraine. Japan's diplomacy in support of Ukraine flipped the script on decades-old foreign policy. When Russia invaded, rather than wait to follow others, Japan seized the leadership moment. Foreign Minister Hayashi attended a NATO foreign ministers meeting. Prime Minister Kishida became the first Japanese prime minister to attend the NATO leaders meeting, joining in Madrid and Vilnius, Lithuania. And Japan not only matched the international community step for step on sanctions, it led in many cases. It was the first nation to commit LNG to Europe for their energy security at the beginning stages of the war. In Southeast Asia, Japan lobbied ASEAN members to great effect. 8 out of 10 of the nations signed on to the UN resolution in March of 2022 against Russia's illegal and illegitimate invasion of Ukraine. And several, including Cambodia, co-sponsored the resolution. As G7 leaders, Japan built consensus among members on the full range of issues, including Ukraine. This ensured a unified G7 position. Further, Japan was able to reach the most forward-leaning language to date among the G7 members to call out and counter economic coercion. Soft power can be used to coerce, or it can be used to attract. While China deploys its soft power to browbeat, Japan is a trusted power and international player. Its soft power, built up through years of cultivating political and economic relationships, provides several benefits to Japan and also to our alliance. Japan followed these successes on Ukraine with the historic trilateral summit at Camp David. There we made the most significant advances with the most capable democratic partners in the most challenging region on behalf of our alliance and our values. While these have been long-term dreams of ours, it's been China's worst nightmare that our allies would work in concert with the United States, and this has become true. Since August of Camp David, there have been over 33 different trilateral gatherings, from the president down to many different military exercises, to later on today, the University in Seoul, South Korea will join the University of Chicago and Tokyo University in a trilateral academic partnership on quantum computing. Myth 3, Japan's economy was going nowhere fast. During my briefings back in late 2021 and early 2022, all of the predictions about the Japanese economy were grim. Look at every nation has had a tough economic time due to what I've called the 3 C's: COVID, the conflict in Europe, in Ukraine, and coercion by both Russia and China. The United States and Japan included, no one is immune to the global economic trends that affect supply chains for everything from food to fuel to semiconductors. Inflation has been hard for all of us. The price of a gallon or liter of milk has gone up in both Topeka and in Tokyo. But Japan has been playing to its strengths as an alternative to the People's Republic of China-bound investment. As a result, the past 2 years have been notable advances for business, investors, and workers. Japan maintained its position as the #1 foreign investor in the United States, and its investment levels hit new record highs. I think we've all seen that in the stock market. We've all seen that Warren Buffett quote that he would answer the phone on the first ring if any of the Japanese companies wanted a partner on future investments. So as China struggles with rising youth unemployment, deflation, and capital intellectual flight, the Japanese have enjoyed wage gains not seen in 30 years, and the Nikkei has hit a 33-year high. This bull market, in my view, reflects something deeper, something more fundamental about the Japanese economy. And no one saw it coming, whether they were sitting on Wall Street or on K Street in Washington, D.C. Similarly, no one predicted that what we have achieved in the area of space. For years, our space cooperation, to be honest, was stuck in lower orbit. It was fine, but several agreements languished at the working levels. What we've achieved together in space over the past 2 years is more significant than all of our bilateral space cooperation combined from the last dozen years. Following President Biden's visit in May of 2022, we signed the framework agreement on space exploration. A Japanese astronaut launched on an American rocket, and through Gateway and Artemis program, we will advance exploration and scientific research in deep space and get to see a Japanese astronaut walk on the moon. Japan was the first partner to sign on to the International Space Station through 2030. Together, we are pushing the limits of humanity's exploration and knowledge. Finally, we are redefining what's possible through a breakthrough of academic partnerships. As you know about the one that we just mentioned, there's going to be another one coming up, and then we also have done one on semiconductor work. These 3 strategic academic partnerships bring together the brightest minds of our nations with our top industry leaders. Together, they will develop new technologies, train the innovators of the future. The United States and Japan will lead and not follow the next technological revolutions, whether in AI, quantum computing, or life sciences. Myth 4, Japan has lost its pop in pop culture. Over the past 15 years, South Korea upped its soft power game through pop culture, breaking out of its domestic market to achieve international success in music, TV dramas, or film. The prospects for Japan to regain the pop in its pop culture weren't apparent to anybody. And then there was Shohei, Drive My Car, Boy in the Heron. We're witnessing a Japanese pop culture moment. I can't overstate the power of Otani, a 2-time Major League Baseball most valuable player, a 2-way star, and the highest paid baseball player ever. Tour groups in the United States are overrun with Otani tourism. As visitors line up to see the star play from Dodger Stadium to Fenway Park. Now they'll get to see a second Japanese player, Yamamoto, play for the Dodgers as well. And in my hometown, Chicago, we also have 2 Japanese players, Suzuki and Imanaga. I know of 7 separate Major League Baseball managers that were all here in the spring, recruiting. Japanese sports moment is about more than just baseball, though. Basketball players in the NBA and tennis fans are cheering the return of Naomi Osaka. Off the playing field, Japanese films, novels, and songs are not just being nominated for international awards, they're winning some of the top honors, both in the United States and globally. The Boy and the Heron won a Golden Globe Award. The Oscar-winning director of Drive My Car scored again at the Venice Film Festival. And the director of Monster won at Cannes. Last year, All the Lovers in the Night was shortlisted for a National Book Award, Critics Circle Award. Now, I have no idea about comic books, what the Demon Slayer is about, and I don't understand it, but the booksellers can't keep it on the shelf long enough. And in another popular titles have elevated American interest in Japanese manga to an all-time high. Almost every major university in the United States now has an anime club. That's cultural currency. That's soft power. And not just in the United States, but around the world. Now, where do we go from here? This is not about myths, but this is about making history. All of the predictions about Japan before I came here, in my view, were just off base. Each new accomplishment on the area of defense, diplomacy, or development, or economic growth, have busted the old myths of Japan. If the last 2 years, in my view, were about transition and transformation, it's fair to ask, what's next? My prediction, not the so-called poly-experts, but this is mine alone, is that the next 2 years will be remembered as the formative and foundational years, where we locked in the gains and built upon them. The Prime Minister's upcoming state visit this spring will be in part a recognition, a celebration of what Japan has accomplished in the past 2 years in the areas of security, diplomacy, economic growth, and soft power. All on behalf of Japan and also the additional benefit it provides to the alliance. It would also set the stage for what comes next. We will consolidate what we've already achieved into a springboard to reach what will be achieved in the years ahead, writing a new blueprint for the next decade. We will expand the quantity and quality of our deterrence capabilities through industrial defense cooperation, strategic procurement, and a broader network of security partners. As the two nations dedicated to supporting the rule of law and transparency, our two economies will become even more closely connected, especially in the emerging and critical technologies. Finally, our people, the bedrock of the U.S.-Japan relationship, will inspire each other to be our best, whether in the area of science, whether in the area of space, or whether in the area of arts and culture. I'll double down on what I said at my confirmation hearing. What the United States and Japan do together in the next 3 years will determine the future of the alliance and the region for the next 30 years. Now, to be true, when I said that in the Senate, I thought I was doing a soundbite or trying to be pithy. I didn't think of it as prescient. But I think anybody that looks back over the last 2 years sees a Japan that has emerged in a different way and a different capability. And I think all of us require an updating of our assumptions, presumptions to the new Japan that's emerging, that is an invaluable ally to the alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Okay, well, thanks for that upbeat assessment. We'll open the floor to questions, first of all, from working journalists. I see 2 hands up. We'll take questions from other people, including experts and propeller heads afterwards. And just remind you, can I just remind you, there's a lot of hands, so please can you ask, if possible, one question and no speeches, please. Thank you. I see that.
Just whoever you call it, where they work or their name, either one.
Yes, of course, you should identify yourself. Yeah, onegaishimasu. The lady in the red coat. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alice French from Nikkei Asia. Thank you, Ambassador, for a very interesting speech today. My question is about this year's presidential election.
What a shock.
You may have been expecting. So Donald Trump's win in Iowa, obviously earlier this week, made headlines in Japan and around the world, and Trump victory is perhaps looking increasingly likely. The last time Trump was president, as you know, among other things, he imposed a 25% tariff on Japanese steel imports, and he's already proposed introducing a 10% tariff on all imports to the US if he wins this year, which could be bad news for Japan. Now, in a 2020 interview, you referred to Donald Trump as a desperate loser. What do you think a potential Trump victory this November would mean for the US-Japan relationship? Would the formative and foundational few years that you just mentioned be possible under a Trump victory? Thank you.
I would just like to note that that quote was pre my diplomatic years, where I've learned being reserved and quiet and listening better. So, look, I just came back from, let me say two things. One is a kind of a clearing, which is obviously once you assume the title and the honor of being an ambassador representing the United States, you don't either have a political or partisan position. So I want to, let's just accept it, and that's going to be the position. I have political thoughts, but they're in a bubble above my head that I can't express. That said, I just came back from Washington last week. There's 2 or 3 countries, 4, that garner huge bipartisan feelings and position. And Japan is one of them. Japan has an incredible depth of support in the United States Congress and also in the country. One, when I came here 2 years ago, I'm trying to remember exactly, I think it was a Pew poll, so I don't want to be quoted on the source, but there were 4 countries rated above 80% in the United States public: Canada, Great Britain, France, and Japan. Now, I want to also be 100% absolutely honest with you. When I started my career in national politics, 1992, working for Bill Clinton, I was responsible for drafting and writing ads in the campaign. We did, in the Midwest, we ran ads on Japan. You couldn't do that today in the United States. Couldn't do it. In the Congress, just by way of example, beyond the fact the president's been here numerous times, Japan, the vice president's been here, the 2 different speakers from both parties. Speaker McCarthy's been here, Speaker Pelosi. We've had over 100 members of the United States Congress here. Our average has been, now I think we're at 21 governors in my tenure, where the average used to be 2 a year. These are ways of expressing to you, and they're just data points of expressing how deep the support is in both parties, not just in Washington, but state capitals across the country for Japan. Obviously, having worked for now 3 presidents, 2 in the White House here representing the United States and being appointed by President Biden, I would say to you, obviously the executive branch has a lot of control of foreign policy and security, but as you're witnessing right now in Congress, the Congress also plays a significant role in national security and foreign policy. And if you just follow the travel of members of Congress, committee chairmen, both parties, both branches, governors, mayors, Japan has a presence in America that has support that runs deeper than Washington or institutions. It runs to the people, and I don't think the travel that I have seen, I think rather the travel I have seen is an indication of how deep that bipartisan support is. So I don't underestimate the influence and the power of a president of appointees, but I also can tell you the depth of support of Japan will run past any individual tenure. And that's not to say predict what that future would be.
Thank you. I see the lady in the front and then the gentleman beside her, and then the lady and this gentleman.
You didn't ask, though, which of the other 3 countries on bipartisanship, but I'll leave that for another time.
Hi, my name is Shoko Oda, and I'm with Bloomberg News. Thanks so much for your speech today. Kind of related to the election, I'd like to ask one question about the ongoing deal between Nippon Steel and US Steel. Several US politicians have spoken against the deal, citing national security concerns and also to protect American jobs. Obviously, with the presidential election in the backdrop, does that put the deal at risk? And if it does fail, because you talked so much about like the Japan and US alliance, what kind of message does that send geopolitically to places like China? Thank you.
So I would like to say, as much as you have restrictions on talking about politics as an ambassador, you also have restrictions on anything that's going through a regulatory process. So as you know, it's going through, the transaction is going through a regulatory process, as does, you can see, JetBlue and Spirit going through a regulatory process. So I'm limited in what I can say. I do think one of the things that is self-evident is not just that it's Nippon and U.S. Steel have historic kind of legacy roles. Steel plays an essential, as a product, plays an essential role in our national security, as it does for Japan, or the steel sector, not U.S. Steel. And so it's going through that normal process review, like any other transaction would go through a regulatory review. And this process will include, because of the component that it touches on something that deals with security, whether you think of that security both for defense purposes or for something such a critical role like the auto industry. So I'm limited in what I can say, but that process is now taking hold and we'll evaluate. I don't think, but let me then flip it to a different topic. In the last 4 years, Japan has been America's #1 foreign direct investor. For the same 4 years, the United States has been Japan's #1 foreign direct investor. Last count, and I don't want to be held to this as an absolute, but I think Japan-based companies' employment in the United States is at or right at touching 1 million Americans. I can tell you that when the state visit comes, there'll be other investments in commercial, what I call commercial statecraft, will be examples of the trust, not just the United States has in Japan and Japan has in the United States, but the capital is today across the globe moving to what I call away from cost and efficiency to stability and sustainability. And there's a trust factor that Japan companies and CEOs have in the United States, its market, its rules, its laws, and the equitable enforcement of those, in the same way that United States-based companies have in Japan. Things that used to be routed towards Beijing are being rerouted to Tokyo because this is a rules-based system where the law holds the highest place, where you have a highly educated workforce with great institutions of higher learning, world-class infrastructure, and great quality of life. Those are incredible, strong assets. And so away from, I understand that deal, but I want to kind of get to a larger plane because I believe that the investments the last 4 years are not going to come, are going to continue on, and based on my meetings as recently as yesterday and last night, many CEOs in the United States across the spectrum of industries see Japan as a great place to make an investment and a great place to make a return on that investment. In the same way that I would say Japanese businesses see in the United States, and they see a future as a great place to make an investment, a great market to make an investment, and a great place to get a return on that investment.
Thank you. The gentleman there, and then we'll take an online question.
You got a couple people here, you got to work the left side of your brain.
I am looking at you. I am looking at you. Yeah, I'll keep an eye on it, don't worry.
I was speaking up for you there.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Richard Susilo from Indonesia, the Kompas newspaper from Indonesia, Richard Susilo. So there will be several elections in this year in several countries, including my country. Next month will be a very interesting elections also. In Indonesia, we have 3 candidates, very interesting also. The candidate one is Islam identity, the main team, and the second is the vice candidate, vice president candidate is from the son of the president, and the third candidate is from the ruling coalition PDIP. So for this next election, by your own self, how far United States is interested on Indonesia for this next election? Thank you.
I want to be able to answer your question, so I want to make sure I'm answering the right question. How interested are we in the Indonesian election? Is that based? Well, One is we're very interested we're very interested in Indonesia beyond the election. Indonesia brings not only obviously it's a very big country. It's got a robust economy. It's got a robust democracy, and when it speaks, it's listened to, and it's heard, and it has an impact. I'm not an expert. Traveled there. Obviously, I think you should have the people of Indonesia have some comfort in knowing that the United States sees Indonesia, heeds or listens attentively to what Indonesia has to say, and so it's beyond just the election. It's the role it plays as a major democratic country with a Muslim background and a robust economy, not just based on resources, but on what it builds with those resources. And very proud to call it a friend.
Thank you. Along the ambassador's advice, I'm scanning the other side. I see the gentleman.
You're the only person in this room that's listened.
Well, we do have to make working journalists first. That's the rule.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. I'm Toshi Ogata with Arc Times. Arc Times. I have a question regarding protection for the victims of sexual assault. So in sexual assault. So in December, your embassy tweeted out about Johnny Kitagawa, victims of Johnny Kitagawa. He was the founder of the top Japanese talent agency, and it's been a huge story in Japan. And your embassy tweeted out that they showed their solidarity to the victims of Johnny Kitagawa. And I just want to ask about your sense, or what do you make of the sexual assault by Johnny Kitagawa lasted more than decades, in comparison with Harvey Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein. And just quickly, what do you think Japan should do to protect those victims? In your speech, you mentioned that Japan is now moving faster than the United States, but when it comes to the protection for those victims of sexual assault, Japanese government has been very slow to act, and they are kind of reluctant to investigate on the matter.
I don't want to cut you off, but I think I got the question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there's like a lot that I want to say on this, because you're asking me a day that also there's a milestone. Japan Airlines today announced a woman who started as a flight attendant is going to be the president of the operation. And this is true for the United States. We also, while we not said we went through, we're going through a MeToo moment for the issue of sexual harassment. You have 4 women on the Supreme Court in the United States. So you have days of progress and days of reminder why you might need to make progress. And the reason I can speak to why I call that out, I can't tell Japan what to do, that's not my role. But I don't think anybody should ever give a safe quarter to sexual harassment. It progresses because there's a code of silence. That code of silence that should not, will not, cannot stand. It cannot be given any room, any quarter to exist. Japan will figure out a way to both protect the victims and give them the ability to restore their lives who have been a victim of sexual harassment and sexual violence in some cases. And the ability to find their voice, and the ability to find that voice means that voice is heard. What they say is listened to and heeded, whether that's in Japan, whether that's in the United States. And if I want to be also directly, whether that happens in the kibbutzes of Israel. There is no place, no quarter the sexual violence should be allowed to have the silence it breeds on. Those who turn their cheeks. And so I won't tell Japan what to do, but I wanted to bring to highlight, because while there are days of progress, there are days that remind us why we need to make progress.
What's the sense of the...
No, sorry,
Johnny
sorry. We've had your question. Thank you. There are other people waiting. Yeah, so that's okay. We have
I have a lot to say on them, but I'm gonna leave it to
there are
the
other
legal
questions in
process.
the room. I have another question, and this one is online, and then I'll take some questions from the other side. This is from Eiichiro Tokumoto, who's a member of this club and a veteran journalist. He notes that apparently the former Prime Minister, Taro Aso, visited the US last week. And the media here is reporting that he tried to arrange a meeting with your favorite politician, Donald Trump. His question, Okamoto-san's question is, did you and the US Embassy in Tokyo help Aso arrange the meeting with Trump? Local media said that only Japanese politicians, Trump members, are Aso. The only Japanese politicians Trump remembers are Aso and former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Apparently, the Kishida administration believes that Trump is highly likely to win the Republican Party primary for the US presidency this fall. That's the background.
The short answer and the direct answer is no, I did not. My time is spent working on and arranging for the state visit by the Prime Minister.
Okay, thank you. The lady over there, she's been waiting a long time. Are you a journalist? Yeah. Okay. Journalist? Journalist?
Yeah. Not journalist.
Hi, thanks for your speech today. I'm Katie Forster from AFP News Agency. So I'm sure you've been following the Taiwanese elections, and I wanted to ask, to what extent would the US and Japan defend Taiwan in the case of a surprise attack? And Japan is in the process of upgrading its defense budget, but do you see it as adequately prepared for such a possibility? Thank you.
Let me, I'll answer the question, but I want to just take one moment so it's not lost. You know, a lot of people, some in this room, some outside this room, say democracy, the democratic process is having, is back on its back heel, or retreating. I hope it's not lost on anybody that in Taiwan, over 70% of the public voted, participated in the democratic process. That doesn't look like, to me, like a retreat. Anyway, it's conventional wisdom to just kind of go ahead and type away the computer and the laptop and say, oh, democracy is having its worst days, or democracy's in full-fledged retreat. I don't know. People Saturday before the election decided to stand in line. Wait to cast a vote, to be heard. So while there was an election in Taiwan and they had the continuity of the party and leadership, I thought it was a good day for democracy. It was a good day for people who want a government that represents, where they get a chance to express who they want to represent them. So for all those that want to be, in the name of criticism, be cynical, democracy had a good day in Taiwan. That's number one. And shouldn't be lost on anybody. To your question about Indonesia, to questions to me about the United States elections. The people of Taiwan stood up for democracy, stood up for the ability to be heard as citizens in the type of government that they'll have. That's number one. Number two, look, we have a long-standing policy in the United States. One China policy has been reiterated by different administrations of both parties. Is there in 3 communiques, the 6 assurances, and the Taiwan Relations Act. And one of the things I've learned in the last 2 years is not to less said about Taiwan, the better. So I'm going to stick to that policy. But I do think, in general, the approach of the United States in partnership with Japan is one of ensuring deterrence that has credibility, to make sure that there's, as the President has said, and other presidents have said, there's no change here in the region by military force. And then we think that has value.
Thank you. This gentleman in the front, I believe, and then the. Did you still have your hand up? Yeah. And then this in the back. We're running out of time, so can you make your questions really succinct?
Yes.
I'll try to make the answer succinct too.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for being here. So I just have two brief questions. One of which is,
Sorry, can you tell us who you are?
Oh yes, Gabriel Dominguez, Japan Times. One question is, what do you make of criticism that might be perhaps stepping out of line with some of the comments or tweets you made on China? And the other one is regarding the U.S. election, whether or not you plan to perhaps over the coming days, weeks, or months join the Biden campaign.
All right, I'll try to be quick since we're running out of time. One, I'm very much enjoying my time here in Japan, representing the United States, and I continue to expect to do that. Two, a lot of, let me just point out a couple things about commenting. China banned all fish from Japan, yet they continue to fish in Japan's EEZ. I'm sorry. I'm going to call out hypocrisy. I'm going to call out economic coercion. And I'll also note on that point, you've had two kind of challenges. One was the water coming from the area going into the ocean. It's been scientifically tested, scientifically monitored, and continue to be monitored in a fully transparent international process. We just today, the Wall Street Journal reported that 2 weeks before China told the world about COVID, they knew COVID was happening, and they stayed silent. They banned travel within China, yet allowed it to continue internationally. Now, I'm telling you, ready, I'm going to go out on a limb, that somewhere in the future, there's going to be a challenge, a crisis that doesn't stay within the boundary of a country. Do you want that country to follow the protocols of Japan, internationally recognized, scientifically based, fully transparent, or should we everybody adopt the Wuhan China policy and protocols? Don't tell anybody, deny that it's happening, and continue to refuse to share any scientific knowledge. I would hope country B chooses in the future, as a citizen of the world, the Japan protocols, understanding the role you have to the international community, to public health around the world, being fully transparent, and holding science and medicine to a status, not that it goes unquestioned, but it gets critical review, and you hold yourself in a fully transparent way. I think everybody here, I'm going to go on a limb, you and your families depend on that. Second, early on I called out that the defense minister was missing 2 weeks after the foreign minister. Now, China said the United States Army was responsible for the Maui fires. False. China said that the United States Armed Forces was responsible for COVID. False. China said that Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia were not real countries. False. I said that the Minister of Defense in China was missing. True. So when it comes to tweets, I mean, maybe it stings when you call out the truth. Let me ask you this question. China said, here's the new youth unemployment number. Raise your hand if you're going to make an investment based on that data. Who here, what international investor trusts that data enough that that's where they're going to go? Okay. Yep, it's 14%. It went from 21 down to 14. We're going to go make an investment based on that. I'm sorry, if you're going to be a superpower, which China is, and a dynamic economy, which China is, or a dynamic country that has a lot to offer culturally to the world, you have some responsibility to not only transparency, but honesty. And on multiple times, it has failed at that.
Thank you. We have about 2 minutes left. Are you okay to stay a few more minutes, or is it?
I'm just getting into my stride.
Oh, that's good news. That's good news.
I can stay on
Gentleman at the
the
front and then the two gentlemen.
Why don't we try to go to 2 to 3 questions more?
All right,
Okay.
sounds good.
Thank you, Ambassador. Alex Wilson with Stars and Stripes. As we've just seen that you are a very outspoken critic of China at times. Do you anticipate the challenges between U.S. and China and challenges between Japan and China, such as the Senkaku Islands, do you anticipate that being an issue or a boon for the U.S.-Japan alliance?
Yeah. Well, let me just say, I'm not trying to be a critic. I'm trying to call out when I think hypocrisy and lack of honesty and transparency, especially like on the Fukushima situation. So look, I mean, one is I think on its own, regardless of China, one of the reasons I wanted to be on the anniversary, I think a lot of us get into a rut and use old categories, describe things, and don't actually update some presumptions and assumptions. And the reason I try to talk about the 4 myths today is because I do think in front of us, and sometimes it's hard to see when you have old categories and old assumptions, there is a new Japan emerging, a more confident Japan. Our alliance is emerging because of that, from protection to an alliance based on the principle of projection. We are lucky to have Japan not only as an alliance, but as an ally. And also, I want to say, as I repeatedly said, as a friend. When the horrible incident happened with the Osprey going down, and we lost 8 Americans, innocent Americans. The first people on the scene were not the U.S. Armed Forces or the Japanese Armed Forces, although they immediately, quickly came. It was Japanese fishermen in the area searching. That's not an alliance. It's something even deeper. It's friendship. And so, yes, you have certain things because it's in contrast. Or we do have a different set of values and principles and interests than China. But on its own, without the contrast, the U.S.-Japan alliance is strong, is solidified, and getting stronger every day.
Seeing as how we're on the subject of China, just let me quote something to you from CNN. They were talking about the arms race in this part of the world. They say there's been nothing like it since the Second World War. They say this: one country's deterrence is another country's escalation. Well, how would you respond to people who say that kind of thing?
Well, look, the way I see it is in kind of national security terms, political terms, or diplomatic. Look, nobody knows where your projection of deterrence ends, and the other people see it as provocation or aggression. It's not a scientific line, it's an art line. And I can say from many, many different meetings I've had, whether it's in the Oval Office or in the Situation Room, trying to understand what you're communicating by X step or Y step, and understanding from the person you're trying to communicate that with, without, if it's deterrence, how it's perceived as your deterrence rather than your, aggression or provocation. And I'm only 2 years into the diplomatic world, been around national security. I can't tell you where one ends and the other one can end. I can say when you have an illegitimate, illegal war like Russia into Ukraine, that's not deterrence. I can say when Hamas breaks a ceasefire, that's not deterrence. That's provocation and aggression.
Thank you. The gentleman who's been waiting.
Patiently.
My name is Peter Morris. I'm a lawyer, but I also write for Asia Times about Myanmar. So I've been following Myanmar for 15 years. I'm not a conflict expert myself, but all the conflict experts say that the regime is going to fall pretty soon, and the Spring Revolution is going to win and set up a democracy. So this is also great news for democracy, like you were saying earlier about Taiwan. Do you know if the U.S. is doing anything about this? And in particular, Thailand has been taking the lead lately to advocate for more humanitarian aid, because that in itself will expedite the fall of the junta, because it will free up resources that are currently being used by the opposition groups to take care of all the refugees and everything. Thailand recently approached Japan to ask to cooperate on humanitarian aid. Is the U.S. getting involved in this kind of effort? And if not, why not? And then the second thing is
we don't really have time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So, look, I'm not. The short answer is I'm not a. You have forgotten more about Myanmar than I know. I know what I read, and so I'm not gonna. I can't. I'm assuming you have pretty good knowledge about whether the junta will fall and quote unquote the democratic rebels will win. So let me. I'll trust that, and obviously the United States will respect that, and then also if it happens, I shouldn't even answer that from a hypothetical, but. I do think it's important, and let me say something larger, because I do think there's a lot of times, and it's not hard to be kind of at this moment dark. I wouldn't say cynical so much as dark about the future, given you have 2 wars now or conflicts going on. This region, no, thank God. But I think when I step back, I look at the world today, and there's a lot of, people are fleeing violence, people are seeking opportunity, they're seeking freedom. You can see that, people fleeing by the boats of Hong Kong or leaving Hong Kong. You can see it here in Japan, where capital, both financial and human capital, is fleeing China for Japan. In the United States, you saw on the border, the #1 population is Venezuelans, then Ecuadorians, then Haitians and Chinese. And the trip from China to Central America and the journey up, it's not an easy, it's not cheap and it's not easy. That tells you, and you can see that kids from St. Petersburg and from Moscow. People are fleeing coercion, aggression, and oppression. They're seeking freedom, both political and economic. They will walk, they will travel, they will leave where they know and family for that. So I can't speak to that case, but I can speak to why it's a piece in a larger mosaic and puzzle that we all who have gotten used to our own freedom sometimes get blinded to what we have and what people will do to sacrifice for their own sense of freedom. And we should not forget this. Freedom is seductive. It has its own gravitational pull. And people will sacrifice, people will suffer to taste the fruits of it.
Thank you. Will you take one more? Is that okay?
Well, it depends on the quality of the question.
Depends on the quality. That's a lot of pressure. Does all. Has to be a good one now.
Well,
John Getty from Reuters. I just wanted to also ask a question about Taiwan while we're on the subject. I mean, yesterday, Taiwan said it detected 18 Chinese Air Force planes around the island, the first large-scale military activity since the election. Do you expect to see more of this kind of activity in the lead-up to the inauguration? And what is your assessment on the impact that these elections could have on the security environment in this region? Thank you.
one is, I think, the last person to ask what China would do as it relates to that is me. So, look, I think I've said, you get a redo on a question. There's nothing more for me to add. You have, and I'm not privy to, obviously the president sent the bipartisan delegation to Taiwan, and I think they're more current on how to view that perspective. I do think, as I said before, we have a one China policy. Our policy has been consistent through Democratic, Republican administrations consistent to the Taiwan Relations Act, and that's how to view it. I kind of take a different, slightly, as an ambassador here, 70%, greater than 70% of the people of Taiwan voted, and I think that says something. That has a message in and of itself. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Well,
for this
thank you to the ambassador. Thank you to the audience for being so well behaved. I didn't have to spank anybody's bottom for making
You all get an
speeches.
A.
Yeah, and no propeller heads. Just if you could show your appreciation to the ambassador who did give his time today and to stay an extra 10 minutes. Thank you very much.